Good morning. I want to do something before I start. I want to thank y'all. I love getting to be back there. Y'all know worship for me, it's such a important part. And getting to sit back there and watch you guys, I want to thank you for making the most of that opportunity. Sunday after Sunday, it means a lot to me to watch you worship and to hear you singing. And if I had one prayer for this church, it would be that would never end. That we get that opportunity to sing to God, that we would do that and do it to the top of our lungs, off key, in key, smiles on our faces, tears in our eyes, that we would do that constantly. And I just want to thank you, man, and because y'all are something to watch. And before I do anything else, it moved me this morning. Did everybody have a good Thanksgiving? Guys, come on. I think I ate like 5 meals. I don't know. It was a lot. My favorite part. What's your favorite part of Thanksgiving? It's family. Nobody's going to say food? Okay. I'll just quit. I just won't go any farther. I tell you, the naps are good, ain't they? There's nothing like gorging yourself and then just laying down and just putting it away. You know? I like it. It's the American way. All right. So enough of that. Well, good. I'm glad you had a good Thanksgiving. So where are we at? Who are we talking about? Good. That's what we're going to continue today. I'm glad everybody's on tab. And I'm not just saying this because he's sitting right here, but Ronnie just shared a great couple of messages with us about waiting on God. If you haven't checked those out, then please do so, guys. Don't forget, you can listen on the podcast. You can look at the website. Keep up with the series because there is not one message that you need to miss out of this series. I want to recap for just a minute, and then I'm going to continue on in the story. And I believe that I have a truth that you all need to hear today. I believe at the end of this that there is a lesson that every single person in here needs to hear today. But before we do that, I got to recap. Are you ready? Okay, good. So, you know about Joseph being sold into slavery. That's way back. He was falsely accused of rape. He was thrown into prison. While in prison, he interprets the dreams of Pharaoh's cupbearer and his baker and kind of trying to facilitate his own way out of prison. And we find out that you can't rush God because apparently Joseph wasn't ready and neither was God. So Joseph ended up having to stay in prison for 2 full years. At the end of those 2 full years, Pharaoh had a dream. Am I going too fast? Is this okay? Y'all like it this way. You're like, man, this was steakhouse. 2 full years. Pharaoh has those dreams. He was greatly disturbed by these dreams because there were some sickly cows eating some fat cows, and I couldn't agree more. Carnivorous cows, that would be terrifying, okay? And so he has it, and it's about week 2. Anyway, it really messes him up. So he seeks the counsel of the wisest people he knows, the magicians, all these people, and he asks them, can anyone tell me what these crazy dreams mean? And apparently there was no one. And there stands who? The cupbearer. That's exactly right. The cupbearer stands there and he says, ding, 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 ding. We believe he was divinely reminded. And he says, I know a guy. And when I was in prison, he interpreted a dream. And he tells him about Joseph. Pharaoh sends for Joseph. They go and get Joseph. They clean Joseph up. And they bring him before Pharaoh. Now, you know this story as well because Ronnie talked about it last week. But they bring him before Pharaoh. And Pharaoh says, I hear that you can tell me what the dreams are. And what did Joseph say? He says, I can't, but who can? God can, which shows us the faith that obviously had been grown in Joseph. It shows us the humility that had been placed in him. And Joseph said, so just tell me the dreams and I'll see what God says to me. So Pharaoh told him the dreams, and Joseph interprets, and this is what they meant. He said, this means Egypt is about to experience 7 years of bumper harvest. 7 years of abundance. Everybody's going to do well. Everybody's going to have food. Everybody's going to have everything. He said, but after that 7 years, there's going to be 7 years of famine. And a matter of fact, the famine is going to be so bad that you're going to forget about the great 7 years you had. That's what it's going to be. But Joseph didn't stop there. In fact, he continued on and he suggested a plan to Pharaoh. Y'all remember this? Shake your heads, yes? He suggested a plan to Pharaoh. He says, here's what you need to do, man. You need to hire you a man. And that man needs to be over some regional directors. And those regional directors, what you do is during that 7 years of bumper harvest, you need to save 20% of all of that. You need to store it back and you need to prepare for the 7 years of famine. Well, Pharaoh goes, that sounds like a pretty good plan. And he goes, looks around, he looks at Joseph, he just listens to this guy, and he goes, was there anybody here that's as filled with the Spirit of God as this man? Y'all remember that? That sentence was so important. Is there anybody here who's as filled with the Spirit of God as this man is right here? And he looked around his court, and he said, no, you're hired, son. You got the job. Now, I need you guys to use your imaginations right here. Because, man, this is where the story just gets crazy. I mean, the story just gets nuts. Everything is about to change in Joseph's life, right? The nightmare is over. The wait has ended. The prison sentence is done. Remember when I preached that part of it when we went through it, and I said this was indefinite. His sentence in that prison was to die in that prison, and now, boom, just like that, it's over. I need you to put yourself in Joseph's shoes. I need you to hear what happened to him, but I need you to feel it. Can y'all do that with me? Shake your heads, yes? And you feel this with me? I need you to feel the change that he experiences. First off, I want to talk about what Pharaoh says to him. Okay? I want you to think about Pharaoh. The very first thing Pharaoh said, he goes, you're in charge of it all. Every single person in this country will now be under your control. That's what he said, except for me. I'm going to sit on my throne, but everybody else here, they will not lift a hand. This is actually the sentence. They will not lift a hand. They will not lift a foot without your approval. Think about the power that Joseph was just handed. Billy, if I were to give you that power, and I said, let's just imagine for a minute that I had this, and I said, Billy Lusk, you're now in control of everyone in Golden Corner Church. How scared would y'all be? You know what I'm saying? But think about that. How much fun could you have, Bill? No, it'd be bad. It would be bad. He is just given incredible power. He's given incredible authority in all of Egypt. And that's not where it stops. Not only was he given that, but then Pharaoh just started giving him all sorts of stuff. First off, Pharaoh gave him a new name, which Ronnie told you about, and it was super cool. It means God lives and God speaks. God speaks. It's a cool name. Then he's given a wife. Joseph had been alone a while, right? That's a good thing. He's given, I'm sure, a fine place to live. He's given jewelry. He's given money. He's given access to the best cooks. Think about poor old Joseph. Think about what he's been eating in that prison. Now all of a sudden, the royal chefs are cooking for him. How many hot dogs do you think that man ate? That'll be the first thing I ordered. All the way, please. Pharaoh dressed him in the finest clothing. Are you getting this? Think about the change that he's experiencing. Gave him a hot new set of wheels, a chariot to ride around on. A chariot that must have been so fancy that everybody just recognized him when he was riding around. Gave him personal servants and gave him his own personal announcer that just walked around in front of him saying, bow, 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 bow. I mean, that would get a little annoying, but how cool is that? How cool is that? Talk about a whirlwind transition from the first thing he was given when he got out of that prison, a bath. I want you to think about the blessings that he is experiencing and the magnitude of them and then just the frequency of them. Everything that happens to him in the blink of an eye. What an incredible change in circumstance. Are you ready to keep reading now? Can we keep on in the story? You caught up? You're where Joseph is. You're feeling what he's feeling. Read with me in verse 47, chapter 41. As predicted, for 7 years, the land produced bumper crops. Boom. The dream that Pharaoh was given and the interpretation that Joseph was given is coming to fruition. Land produced bumper crops. During those years, look at what Joseph did. Joseph did exactly what he said he was going to do. He gathered all the crops grown in Egypt, and he stored the grain from the surrounding fields in the cities. He piled up huge amounts of grain like sand on the seashore. Guys, I mess that up every time I've read it this week. That's the first time I've gotten it right, thank God. Sand on the seashore. See, it's hard. That is a lot of grain. That's a lot of food. He is piling up. And the next verse says, or the next part says, finally he stopped keeping records because there was too much to measure. I want you to think about this. He's storing so much food that he's just like, Give up. Don't even try to write it down anymore. Just throw it in the back. Just stuff it down in there somewhere and we'll get to it later. It's like Brittany's closet. We'll get to it later. They store so much stuff. Verse 50, during this time before the first of the famine years, 2 sons were born to Joseph. Sorry, it's always, I don't know why. Just busts me up. Two sons were born to Joseph and his wife, Asenath, the daughter of Potiphar, the priest of On. Joseph named his older son Manasseh, for he said, you got to see this. For he said, God has made me forget all my troubles and everyone in my father's family. Who y'all think he's talking about? Okay, we'll just move on. 52, Joseph named his second son Ephraim, for he said, God has made me fruitful. Look at that. God has made me fruitful in the land of my grief. God has blessed me. God is using me. In this place, think about these years, these 13 years, this place that has been a place of grief for me. The things I've endured, the pain I've been through, the suffering and the waiting, God's made me fruitful. It's pretty awesome, isn't it? Now, just like was predicted, after the seven years of abundance came the famine. And boy, was it severe, guys. It was every bit as severe as promised. And it wasn't long into this famine where Joseph had to begin distributing these grains that they had stored in Egypt. He was distributing them to the people of Egypt. Go into the storehouses. And the famine wasn't just severe in Egypt, it was affecting the neighboring areas as well. And that's where we're going to pick up in verse 42, chapter 42, verse 1. It says, when Jacob heard, hang on, who did I say? Who's that? This is Dad. So we're going back a little bit. We're going to some people we hadn't read about in a while. So when Jacob heard that grain was available in Egypt, he said to his sons, why are you standing around looking at one another? I just love that. Don't you? Hey, chop, chop. I do that to Andy all the time, getting ready in the morning, you know. Hey, wake up. Why are you just standing around looking at one another? Apparently things were very bad in Jacob's house. Apparently things were going on, headed downhill. Jacob says, I've heard there is grain in Egypt. Go down there and buy enough grain to keep us alive. Otherwise, we'll die. So apparently the famine is hitting them pretty hard. And the sons, the brothers, Joseph's brothers, aren't doing anything about it. Verse 3, so Joseph's 10 older brothers went down to Egypt to buy grain. But Jacob wouldn't let Joseph's younger brother, Benjamin, go with him for fear some harm might come to him. Does it sound like somebody wised up? Doesn't sound like he trusts him very well, does it? So Jacob's sons arrived in Egypt along with others to buy food, for the famine was in Canaan as well. All right. So now people are coming from all over. And the brothers are headed to Egypt. And this is the most important part of our story today. I want you to read this with me in verse 6. Can you get it up there? Since Joseph was governor of all Egypt and in charge of selling grain to all the people, it was to him their brothers came. His brothers came. When they arrived, they bowed before him with their faces to the ground. Did you see it? Do you see our point today? Our lesson today? Because I'm stopping there. Because we got to talk about this. And it's something that all of you have to see. It's something that all of you have to know today. Are you ready? God is faithful to the last detail. God is faithful to the last detail. Say it with me, please. God is faithful to the last detail. Let's talk about the first half of it. God is faithful. Do you know what I'm saying? God will do what He said He will do. Think about everything that's just transpired in Joseph's life. Think about everything that he's experienced. Think about the transition, the change, that when the nightmare ended, God did exactly what He said He would do. God fulfilled His promises to Joseph. You have to get this, and I know this sounds like the simplest point in the world. You're like, Tim, yeah, we talk about this all the time. Matter of fact, we sing it in songs all the time. I need you to listen to me. In the expanse of our waiting, in the turmoil of our pain and suffering, you know one of the easiest things there is to forget? It's easy to forget that God is faithful, that God's going to do what He said He will do, that God will fulfill the promises that He has made to us. In all that we experience in this life, I'm telling you what you will forget that He's faithful to you. He will perfect and complete the promise that He has made to you. He will follow through. God will show up. God will show out. Can I share another verse with you? I love this verse, and I just had to use it this morning. In 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 13. I'm going to read just the last half of it here. If we are unfaithful, it says, He remains faithful, talking about God. If He remains faithful, for He cannot deny who He is. You know what that means? That means God, because He is God, can only be faithful. He cannot deny who He is. He cannot go back on His word. He cannot break a promise. God had shown Joseph where he was going to end up, right? In the very beginning, God showed Joseph where you're going to end up. He said, you're going to end up, you're going to be a ruler, Joseph. That's what you're going to be. And Ronnie and I have described numerous times how, I think we've said it numerous times, that we wouldn't have wrote his story this way, right, Ronnie? If we could have wrote the story, we would have wrote it, man, it would have been a lot easier on Joseph. And although I know that we all wouldn't have written his story this way, I'm hoping that now that you can see from all these lessons that we talk about, you can see how necessary it all was and how it all connected, and it was all taking Joseph to where he was going to be. And that's great, and that is so important that you see. But more importantly this morning, you have to know, and what you have to see, that if you are a believer in the holy, mighty, perfect God, the only possible outcome in Joseph's story was his dreams coming true. That's it. The promise that was made to him by God had to be fulfilled. Because God said it would. Were there moments of doubt? Maybe. A crazy plan with twists and turns that made absolutely no sense? Sure. Letdowns, enemies, tests, suffering? Absolutely. But with God as the author of this story, you have to know it couldn't end any other way. God is good and He is faithful, and He cannot deny who He is. The story would end with Joseph on a throne. But that's not all I said in our lesson, is it? I said God is faithful, and what was the last part? Somebody say it? To the last detail. I need you to see this because it's easy for it to get lost. And everything that has happened in Joseph's life, I mean, we're at least 22 years down the road in Joseph's life right now. We're 2 months removed in our series from the very beginning, from the dreams. I think it's easy to miss this point as well because so much good is happening in Joseph's life, right? I mean, there's so many blessings being poured onto him, one after another. Wife, kids, fancy cars, fancy house, great food, bow the knee. There's so much good. But what was the dream? What was the dream God shared with him in the very beginning of our story? Read with me. Genesis chapter 37, verse 6. This is Joseph talking to his brothers. He said, listen to this dream. He said, we were out in the field tying up bundles of grain. And suddenly my bundle stood up and your bundles all gathered around and bowed low before mine. What did the bundles represent? The brothers. That's exactly right. If you remember, they represented his brothers, and his brothers got angry. And I'm telling you, often I think we look at this story and the brothers now seem like an insignificant detail. I mean, they're long gone in our story. So much has happened since then. Joseph has been blessed immensely and is doing so well. I mean, it seems like an insignificant detail. Even to Joseph had named his son Manasseh, right? Which means I think he had tried to cope with it. I'd forgotten all about my brothers. I've forgotten all about my father's family, no? Do you know who it mattered to? It mattered to God. There was absolutely no way that God was going to do this any other way. It's what He promised. It's what He showed him. That detail mattered to God. And He was going to have them go there. And He was going to have them presented to Joseph. And He was going to have them bow in front of Him with their faces to the ground because God said He would. God cared deeply that what He revealed to Joseph in a dream be manifested in Joseph's life. It mattered to God that every single piece, down to the seemingly smallest insignificant detail, be taken care of. So the brothers bowed, and God was faithful to the last detail. Now you need to know something. I need to tell you something. God is still faithful. God hasn't changed. He hasn't decided to start altering His contracts or doing it differently. God is still faithful. God is still unwavering. God can't possibly fail you. And this morning, if you're here and you've been waiting on something, I know this series has spoken to you. If you're waiting on something that God has set before you, and you know this is where He wants me to be, this is what He wants me to do, this is where He's taking me, but I just cannot seem to get there, you need to know something. God is faithful. He will do what He said He will do. He will take you to where it is that you're supposed to go. He will lead you and get you there. If you're here this morning and you're experiencing some sort of trial, and it has been painful, you need to know God can't deny who He is. And if He's told you that He's going to get you out of it, you need to know something. He will. It couldn't end any other way. I don't know what your journey looks like. I don't know when or how He's going to answer. I don't know the twists and turns that your story is going to have, but I know this. God is faithful. And not only that, but when God acts and when He finally moves in your life, He will dot every I and he will cross every T. There will be no stone left unturned. He will make sure that your story and your journey and the promise that he's made is fulfilled to the letter. This is what I'm saying. You won't be disappointed when you get to the end. When God does something, you won't go, well, he kind of didn't do this. That's not the way God works. If he told you that he's going to do something, he's going to do it. He's made a promise to you. He's going to fulfill it. To completion. His will be complete in your life. You can bet on it. And when his will is complete in your life, then your joy will be complete in this life, and your peace will be complete in this life. When God finalizes his plans, they will be perfectly complete to the last detail. So knowing that fact, what should we do? God is faithful to the last detail, so what should we do? We should be faithful. We too should be faithful. You say, Tim, what do you mean? Well, if God being faithful is God doing what he says he will do, then us being faithful is us doing what God asks us to do. You want me to say that again? If God being faithful is God doing what he said he will do, then us being faithful is us doing what he asked us to do. That's us being faithful. I want you to look back at Joseph's life. I want you to look at how his world turned. When he was made a slave, what did he do? He was the best slave he could be, wasn't he? He worked at it with all of his might. When he was a prisoner, what did he do? He worked in the prison with everything he had. What did every single, these leaders that he came in contact with, what did they all say about him? What did they all see in him? What did Potiphar see in him? God. What did he point out? He could tell that this man was filled with God. What did the warden see in him? God. He could tell that this man was filled with God. And what did Pharaoh say about him? Is there anyone more filled with the Spirit of God than this man? Do you know why? Because Joseph went into all of those situations and he worked hard and he tried to make the most of it and he represented God in every single aspect of his life. That's what he did. He lived for God and it was obvious to everyone around him. That is being faithful. It was obvious that this man was following God. It was obvious that he was living for God. Joseph was consistently faithful. And that's what we should do. In our journey, wherever God sends us, whatever he asks us to do, and whoever it is he puts in front of us, you know what we're supposed to be? Faithful. We should pursue it with the best of our abilities. We should make the most out of it. And in everything that we do, every word that we say, we should represent God to the best of our abilities. That's what we should do. That's how you move from being second in command of Potiphar's house to second in command of the prison to second in command of an entire country. Joseph's faithfulness made those steps possible, and God honored them and made it so. What do you think Joseph would say to you this morning if he was up here? For those of you that are struggling, what do you think Joseph would say to you? I'm going to venture a guess. And I think Joseph would be all right with it. I think Joseph would look at you and he would say, guys, I know you're hurting. I know it's tough. I know the way has been long. But I'm going to encourage you to do something. Stay faithful. Man, make the most of where he's got you. Work your heart out. Love your heart out. Serve your heart out. Man, love God with everything that you have. Let everybody see it. Don't be afraid to show it. Just stay faithful to Him. Because eventually, guys, I want to tell you something. He will be faithful to you. You can count on it. He will. He is going to show up in your life. He is going to show out in your life. And when He is done, you will look back and you will go, this is a masterpiece, and I have no idea how He brought me to this point. I have no idea how He did this for me. Why are you so good to me? Why are you blessing me like this? Because I'm telling you, that's exactly how I felt when Pharaoh put me in charge. When my brothers came all the way from Canaan and bowed before me, I said, God, you are a good God. You did what you said you would do. And then some. That's what Joseph would say to you. I want to say something. I second him completely. I have no idea in my life why God saw fit to do all of the things that He's done for me. He has been faithful at turn after turn, in trials, in pain, periods of waiting. He has been faithful to me. When I started working, started in the ministry, Ronnie had this saying that he said to us all, or said to me all the time. And it was whenever we faced something challenging or we faced something difficult, but Ronnie would say, Tim, he said, your job is to be faithful. Your job is to be faithful. You be faithful to God. You live for Him. You represent Him in everything that you do. You go at everything. Wherever He puts you, whoever He puts in your path, you make the most of it. That's your job to be faithful. I'm telling you. He probably didn't know it at the time, but that was going to become like a mantra for my life. And when I look at God and I look at everything that He's done and how He's answered prayers and He's moved and He's blessed us and fulfilled promises in His Word that I've read, I'm telling you, it's easy for me to look and go, I'm going to be faithful. I'm going to be faithful to Him. As a dad, I'm going to be faithful to God. As a husband, I'm going to be faithful to God. As a minister, I'm going to be faithful to God. As a friend, I'm going to be faithful to God. God is faithful. And don't you forget it. And He'll take care of every single detail. And it will truly be something to watch. Let me pray for you. Father, I just want to thank you. I don't know how we forget it. I don't know how we go a day without making a note of it in our minds, putting a star beside it. I don't know how it slips our minds. We have a whole book in your word that proves who you are. It proves without a shadow of a doubt that you are the God in heaven, that you love us, and that you will be faithful. That you are faithful. And that time and time again, what you have done is you have made promises and kept them. You've answered prayers. You've moved on our behalf time and time again. And I see a sea of people out in front of me who have the exact same stories that we read, who could stand up and say, God is faithful because I've seen Him do this in my life. I don't know how we forget it. But we have a tendency as your people to start to live differently than that. We start to question and we start to worry, and fear grows inside of us that maybe what you said is not going to work out. What you've asked us to do, maybe it's the wrong direction. And all of a sudden, all this junk creeps into our mind. God, I want to pray this for this church, that we will become a church that rests in the fact that you are faithful. We believe it with all of our hearts. We live our lives knowing that you are who you say you are and that you will move exactly like you said you would. I want our prayers to reflect that. I want our family lives to reflect that. And God, because of your overwhelming faithfulness, because of your secure faithfulness in us, to us, God, I pray that we'll be faithful to you, that we will not waver. We will not shy away when the going gets tough. God, that we will pursue you with all our heart, souls, and mind, that we will love you with all our heart, souls, and mind, that we will represent you to the people around us. We'll love the people around us and serve the people around us the way we're supposed to, God, and that we will go wherever it is you tell us to go, and we'll do whatever it is you tell us to do. That we will live faithfully, and with our little bit of faithfulness that we can show, and the incredible amount of faithfulness that you are, God, what we will see is we will see a world transformed. We will see our worlds transformed and the worlds of others. That's the kind of people we want to be, God. Father, we love you. And I thank you for each and every person that's here. I pray that you be with them headed into December right here, God, and that they will make Christmas memorable. They will love each other and love others the way we're supposed to, God, and that they will seek you with everything in them. In Jesus' name, everyone says, amen. Thank you so much for being here this morning. I hope you have a great day. Love you. See you next week.